Hello and welcome to this episode of The Listening Post, brought to you by Council for Drug-Free Youth. I'm Joy Sweeney, and with me today is Ed Moses, a retired Missouri Highway Patrol officer. Thank you, Ed, for being here.
You're most welcome.
I appreciate your time. And his most notable accomplishment is he's married to Grandma Moses. I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that. First of all, Ed, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and why you have, or how you've become a subject matter expert on marijuana?
My background is mostly that I was interested in science. So I began my police career in St. Louis City in the 60s. I came on the Highway Patrol. I was going to be a criminal investigator. I went to Master's Death Investigation School, criminal school. But then when I got out in the undercover world and started working undercover and discovered really neat kids from really great families, involved in drugs, destroying their lives, having difficulties that they didn't have before, Kathleen and I talked it over and decided prevention was far more important than investigating after the fact. So about 1977, a local high school student asked me to talk to his friends about their drug problems, and it launched a career in drug prevention, drug education.
Wow. Okay, and here you are today, retired.
Still doing drug education.
And still working, exactly. Yeah. Retired to a certain degree. Well, first of all, since you are such a scientific expert, and I know that you're not a doctor, but you've presented with many doctors, and you have researched and heard research presented on this topic, I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference in the impact on the brain between marijuana users and non-users. So, we've got a little slide here that we'd love to present and have you share with us a little bit.
The science on the brain is quite new. They didn't isolate the molecular structure of THC until about the 70s, 80s, and they identified the brain receptors in 1992. This is when they found that THC actually mimicked a neurotransmitter, a chemical in the brain that talks to the receptors naturally, anandamide, and it's similar, but that's where it's very important. When a chemical is similar to a brain transmitter, a brain chemical, that means it's not exactly the same, which means there's going to be some brain changes, brain adaptation, what they call neuroadaptation. And the brain's going to accommodate that new, different structure. And when we use anandamide, which is a normal brain chemical, it is used and released and taken back in a very relatively short period of time. So the brain cell isn't exposed to anandamide longer than necessary on normal communication areas that it affects. However, on THC, it is fat soluble. It stays in the body for weeks. And here you have it impacting that receptor for an incredibly long time, meaning going through further changes. That's very significant.
Right, and so in the slide here, you can see the non-user's brain, and then you can also see the daily users, and the difference in this portion right here, and this
Correct.
Shows activity. I mean,
that area is called the corpus callosum. And what that is the left brain, right brain, the two hemispheres, needs to communicate with each other. And that is a passage to the two hemispheres. You can see that there's less activity in the user's brain, meaning less images, less messaging, less intelligence. And that's pretty profound on marijuana. I think he has some other slides that will show the accumulation impact. And that's another big danger of marijuana, is that its impact accumulates.
Over time,
yes.
That increases, and that really significantly reduces, that's one of the ways we've found it reduces IQ points.
Yes, there's been a very good longitudinal study with a large volume of people that was initially challenged. It was reconsidered and validated to be correct, and they showed that someone who smokes marijuana up until age 20 and then quits, that it's possible that they can lose around 8 IQ points by middle age. And that's a significant finding.
That is definitely significant. And I mean, what have we learned from some of the other states that have legalized medical and or regular marijuana? I mean, what has been the impact in those states?
Well, we've learned a couple of things. On the negative impact, such as Colorado, and they've taken a 6-year span of time to show the change of legalization and prior to. And the strange thing was we've had, and again, it's different years, so there's a range, but we reduced, or they did, DWI fatalities with alcohol and other substances 14 to 16%. In the same time period, marijuana fatalities went up 100 to 114%. So we've seen a tremendous impact on highway safety because marijuana is very complex in the areas that it affects the brain. A lot of areas that we need for safe driving.
Right.
We've seen a sharp increase of children being exposed to marijuana, and we're talking marijuana that has gone from Woodstock weed with less than 1% THC. When I was undercover in the 70s, marijuana was about 1 to 3%. Really strong pot was 5%. And 5% marijuana is still strong, but it's only 1/3 of the national average. Wow. National average now is about 15% THC. That's psychotic level marijuana. Someone that is smoking 15% THC, one puff on a regular user, and a regular user will say that they become blitzed or blitzed out high on one puff of 15% THC.
I can't imagine.
Some of the products that are being exposed to are 60 to 99% THC. So we're talking about a very strong psychotic chemical now. And it's no longer Woodstock weed.
No, it's not the olden days pot
No.
that your parents or grandparents smoked.
No, and in fact, the fear of the people who want to legalize marijuana is that the science and education is going to catch up to them. And if people really realize what we were discussing, they, in their own words, said, we will never get another marijuana law passed. That's their statement on their blogs. They know the brain science, the new product is so powerful, no one in their right mind would want to legalize this stuff.
Right. So that's why they're trying to rush things.
Oh yeah, big push. And 216 is the push for legalization because they feel like if they don't get it this coming year, the science and education will catch up to them.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Ed Moses. I appreciate your time here. We need to take a short break, so we'll be right back and talk to Ed Moses a little bit more about the marijuana, today's marijuana, and the consequences on our society. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Donna Scheidt with the Jefferson City Daycare Center. The Jefferson City Daycare Center is a licensed daycare with an accredited early childhood education program. We care for up to 99 children ages birth to 8, primarily from low and middle income families. The Jefferson City Daycare Center, providing quality early childhood education services in a caring environment. We're proud to be a United Way partner agency. Find us online at www.jcdcc.org and like us on Facebook.
Hello, and we're back talking to Ed Moses, retired Missouri Highway Patrolman, about the consequences of marijuana and the adverse impact on our communities. Thank you again, Ed, for being here.
Most welcome.
And we were kind of interrupted there briefly when you were discussing some of the challenges that some of the states that have legalized marijuana are facing. And would you like to elaborate? I know that we have a slide here too about the states that have approved medical pot and the abuse and the damage and how that goes up and significantly. And so maybe we can show that to our audience about how even in just, and this is from 2013, and this is the past month usage by 12 to 17-year-olds here in this slide. And you'll see the red states, the red lines are the lines of the states that have legalized prescription or medical marijuana.
That's true, and it's very obvious. If you want to increase your marijuana use in the young people, then pass the bogus medical law. And the reason I call it bogus is it not only is not a medicine, it cannot qualify for a medicine. And there are various reasons for that. very briefly, there is no research showing it's safe or effective. And that is the criteria to get something off Schedule 1. Schedule 1 drugs, which marijuana is, along with heroin and LSD, have no medical usage because they're not proven safe and they're not proven effective. But equally important is that all of our medicines have to be consistent. When we buy a brand medicine on the West Coast, it has to be the same composition on the East Coast. If I get 2 bags of marijuana off the same plant, both those bags are different. And an hour later, they're different than they were when they were picked. Marijuana is an unstable chemical. You cannot legalize substances that are unstable. You have to have a consistency. And this is one reason we have the synthetic drugs out there, the K2, the spice. They were developed because if a researcher does research on marijuana, the other researchers need to replicate that to validate this research.
Right.
Well, if I use raw marijuana, it's a different substance if I share it with them at a later time. So they can't replicate my research because they didn't start with the same base product. In order to do that, you need to have the chemicals synthetically made. That a year, 2 years later, what chemical to use? I use JWH 79, here it is. I know what chemical I'm starting with. So that's why marijuana can't be a medicine. Now, can we derive medicines from it? Oh, I hope so. We have, and I hope we continue. But we derive medicines from food poisoning, botulism. We derive medicine from horse urine, from moldy bread, from willow tree bark. So I hope we derive a lot of medicines out of plants, but we won't legalize a plant as a medicine.
Well, and some of the science that you've been privy to, or that I've heard from some of your presentations and other people's, Dr. Thurstone, some of the other medical professionals, has stated that there's a prescription to becoming a medicine in this country. There's a way that all other medicines are FDA approved, and they're certainly not just, we don't pass a law and get them to become a medicine. And so can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yes, and it's so common sense ridiculous. What patient would go into a doctor and inform the doctor what medicine I want? Usually that's the reverse. The doctor tells you what medicine you need. Here we have the patient going in and say, "Doctor, I want marijuana, and I'm going to tell you how much I want, how strong it has to be, and I'll tell you how often I want to use it." And then the doctor does not prescribe it, and this is very important. People think doctors prescribe it. They don't, and they won't. The reason is, when I prescribe it, I'm liable and responsible. But if I recommend, I can't be held liable. So doctors only recommend that you do the product you suggest to them. And we don't vote on science. No. If we're going to vote on science, we need to vote on no gravity, and we could just float around Mother Earth. I mean, you don't vote on science. And medicine is a science that you wouldn't vote on. It's ridiculous.
Well, and that's why we have this slide here that, okay, well, maybe we have a slide here, that it's FDA approved medicines, and they're legalized medicines. There's no purity, no safety, no effective, and no recall, and like you said, docs recommend it. And then also the contamination aspect of marijuana is another scary element to this drug.
That slide was referring to the CBD oil, the Charlotte's Web. And that's, again, an unstable, unrefined, unpurified form. And the sad thing is, the state of Missouri could have accepted a program that FDA and DEA approves. Insurance companies said it meets medical research protocol. They would insure the family. It would be no cost to Missouri, and it was approved. Instead, we've got a very cumbersome law that hasn't even taken effect yet to grow a crude form of unstable, ever-changing. No dose will be exactly the same as the last dose. And now other states are looking at doing the research protocol that has been approved, that's free, cost-effective, purified, and researched with a double-blind study to make sure it is safe and effective. The program that we passed as law has no such thing. In fact, I asked the sponsors, and they said they might have a survey to see how it goes. But I don't know what they're going to survey, because to do a scientific survey, it has to be a consistent dose in the first place.
Right.
This garbage isn't.
No, and that's so frustrating, because we've got all of this science to prove the facts, and then we've got all of this all these false statements that are contradictory to all the science that we have, and how people can think that voting on a medicine is the correct way to get medicines in here, when we've already got something that works for
Well,
those.
and another thing to take into consideration on this is, here's your base state normal. Here is medical dose. Here's intoxication, coma, and then death. What other medicines do we tell the patient to take until you're intoxicated on it?
None.
And then, if we're going to call it a medicine, why doesn't it have medical names? And I've asked the legalizers this. Why are you calling it purple Urkel, diesel fuel, purple haze, all these weird street drug names? Right. And they told me, well, that's the names our patients can relate to. And I said, then your patients are street drug users, because that's the language of street drug abuse,
right,
not medical science.
Right, and so why would we think that as a society, why would we think that this is the way we want to take?
Money, greed, and people who want to get access to the drugs. And the thing of the matter is, I was undercover in the 70s, in the mid-70s.
Right.
This is the same talking I heard around the drug tables, undercover at the political meetings to legalize marijuana in the 70s, that we're hearing today. The difference? There's big money behind it today. There wasn't then. Okay. We have George Soros and his minions of billionaires that's funding legalization, blatantly and openly. In fact, George Soros wrote a book about himself called Soros on Soros, S-O-R-O-S, George Soros. He's a billionaire, one of the richest people in the world.
Right.
And his declaration is he wants to legalize all drugs. And he will tell you in the book this. And that's what's driving the legalization, is big money, big profit, and people who want access to an intoxicating drug.
And you know, I've talked to former addicts, I've talked to all kinds of different people, and the consequences are so significant for our society. You mentioned earlier the traffic fatalities in Colorado, and so why isn't anybody getting any of the facts, and why is all this information being suppressed?
Well, it's amazing how much, well, if you look at marketing, we show people pet rocks, that they walked on rocks to go in a store and buy a $5 pet rock in a box. We've sold Colorado Air. We've sold Florida Sunshine in soda cans. We've sold tobacco. There's not a single one benefit, long-term social benefit, in smoking tobacco that kills 1,000 people a day. So it's no big surprise we can market marijuana in spite of all the obvious consequences.
Well, okay, and so you basically chalking it all up to marketing.
There is a lot of marketing. And again, the people who want access to the drug, they've been talking about this since the 70s. They decriminalized about 7 states in the late 70s, or maybe 11 states. And then the education got out there, and the 80s stopped them. Well, they're afraid they're going to get that repeated if the education catch up with them on the new marijuana, the new ways of using it, and the new information on the brain and the impact. It's devastating. On that one slide that you were showing of the states that have taken on medical marijuana and how that increased the usage among teenagers, right next to that was brain slides. If you'll notice, there were holes in those brains.
Absolutely.
Now, in actual matter, there weren't any holes in the brain. That was measuring energy or activity in the brain. And in those space holes, there's no activity going on. That's very unique to the brain in that we use all the brain all the time. There's never a time you get those holes unless you're doing brain damage or drugs.
Yeah, and that's really disappointing that we could think that that's acceptable and allow our children and our youth to have be subject to that. You know, and those brain slides, I was trying to see if I could bring those up so that we could show those to people, because, you know, I mean, it is really scary to think that our children have absolutely no activity going on in their brains.
Well, it's kind of funny. In high schools, when I'm talking with the students there, they'll always challenge me by saying, there's someone on the honor roll that uses marijuana.
Right.
And I'll say, well, compared to what percent on a C student? Well, probably more C students. I said, well, how about your dropouts? They said, oh, well, they all use pot. And I said, in my business, we call that a clue. And if you go to the data, they'll show you the single most common reason for dropping out of school on some activity related to that is marijuana.
Absolutely.
Number one reason for dropping out of school, because they can't retain the information. There's a lot of receptors around the hippocampus in the brain. That's how we store memory in the brain. Right. And it's always joked about in comedy and movies and songs, about the difficulty to remember
right. I
on
can't
marijuana.
Remember. Yeah.
Well, there's a science fact for that.
Right. The reason
and if
is
you can't remember data, if you can't remember information, you're probably not going to do very well in school.
Right, right. And I think the last time I had somebody in who was a former addict, that he was like, "Well, I'm not sure if it was because I couldn't remember, or I couldn't recall the information, or was it because I just wanted to procrastinate the information."
Well, and we want to blame our school systems for not doing a sufficient job on education. If you're stoned on the weekend, just the weekend, you're not a very good student on Monday and Tuesday.
No.
You're not going to retain that information.
No.
If you smoke more than weekend, and in Colorado they're having a huge problem with what they call vaping in the classroom. And their slang out there is leave class without leaving the classroom. And on vaping, that's the electronic e-smoke
Right.
that you can inhale, and when you exhale, it dissipates in a matter of a second or two. So it doesn't linger. There's not an odor. So students can actually, and do, smoke in the classroom, get spaced out, cannot be taught anything, and the teacher's unaware. Right. Not because she's a poor or he's a poor teacher and unobservant. You can do it in a matter of a few seconds, and it's not detectable. So even your good, alert, sharp teachers are going to be subjected to students phasing out in the classroom by smoking dope right there in the classroom, unbeknownst to anybody else.
Right, right. Where and I've actually had youth right here in Jefferson City say that they've seen other students vape in the classroom,
sure.
and it's gone in a matter of seconds. Nobody else can tell unless you see them actually doing the act. And that's very disconcerting. How can a teacher address that issue?
Or they can do an edible before class, and it takes an hour or two to kick in. And these edibles, we're having some bizarre psychotic results of that. If you remember, the gentleman from Wyoming took an edible, thrashed around in the room and to himself off the balcony and died. Another married man, happily married, a wife, I think had three children, came home from eating a medical edible, they call them, marijuana and a piece of candy. Walked in the door, told his wife, get the gun, shoot me, it's all over. She got on the phone with 911 and called and said, my husband has done an edible, and they'd used marijuana prior. It was reportedly that they'd used marijuana prior, so they were familiar with it. But on this strong dose, he came out of the room and put the gun to her head and murdered her while she's on the phone with 911. We had a Kentucky state police officer, his cousin's son, did a medical edible in Tennessee from Colorado. And he was in a ICU for days on one edible that he had taken. It is serious consequences on the new products and the new strengths of marijuana.
Well, because some of those edibles have really high, as you were talking about before, the high dosage of THC, so high that we haven't even really had an opportunity to experience the impact on human.
Correct. And if those listening don't believe it's a huge problem, I'd challenge them to put in their window search on their computer butane hash oil explosions, or BHO explosions, and see how many kids are burning themselves, blowing up their house, killing themselves on making an incredibly simple product. I could teach a preschooler to make BHO, and BHO can be 60, 80% or higher THC. and plus it's very explosive, very dangerous. And now they're selling these butane dispensers odorless. Odor was put in there to make it safe, so you could smell if you had a leak.
Right.
Now they're making these canisters odorless, and these people can have it in their clothing, walk across the room, get static electricity, and go into flames.
Oh my goodness.
This is dangerous, a dangerous business.
And I've heard you speak about that, and we have a little slide with this butane hash oil and what it looks like and how they can, I've heard about the explosions, and they're really devastating, and that's one of the new ways, it's with any drug. You come up with the newest, latest way to involve it in the vaping and the hash oil, and there's this other thing, dabbing, I think. What's...
And they've kind of invented a new language because everyone was getting on to 420, the April 20 International, or 420 in the afternoon to smoke pot. Now it's 710, which is, if you take 710 and spin it upside down, it spells oil. And that means July 10th is now the International Oil Dabbing Day. They make the wax and they superheat a nail. You'll see shirts with "nail it" on it and the Nike swoosh. And this is a superheated nail that they put the dab on and ingest. So there are many different forms of it now that are very, very strong. In one case that myself and an officer, Sergeant Dan Penrod with the Union Police Department, he and I documented a case of a veteran heavy marijuana smoker that he inhaled one puff of almost 16% THC, and he was zoned out on one puff. And he is a late 20-year-old, close to 30-year-old heavy user. And normally people who use heavily at that age begin to be what they call plunked out,
right,
unable to get a high because they have such a high tolerance. The new dabbing, oils, and this, old burnout dopers now can get stoned again on this new product because it's so strong. And this was right at 16% THC, and all it took for him is one puff.
Wow. And so, okay, all this is devastating information. What are some of the solutions that we have available to us for parents today? Is all hope lost?
I think the most simple one is one that Dr. Johnston, with a T, from Michigan University has been promoting for decades. Most people know him as a coordinator of monitoring the future. Okay. The national statistics that come out on drug usage. He's the gold standard on surveys of drug consumption. And his message is that perceived risk and perceived approval or disapproval drives usage. And I agree with him completely. If a young person perceives that a risk, whether getting in trouble with parents or police or harm from the product, and if they perceive it's disapproved of by parents, by police, by schools, by community, then you have very little usage. And what we see is a very long trend of that happening. When we address an issue and educate on it, use goes down.
Right.
For instance, tobacco usage is going down.
Absolutely.
Binge drinking is going down. We're educating on that. We're not educated on marijuana. And in 2009, for the first time, Dr. Johnston's survey showed more seniors are smoking pot than tobacco. And that has only gotten further separated since 2009, because we're doing more education on tobacco, less education on marijuana, and now we're seeing more and more children do more marijuana than tobacco.
And I have kids all the time tell me that marijuana is not harmful. So we've got to bring you back and have you talk again. But thank you so much for listening here today. That was Listening Post, brought to you by the Council for Drug-Free Youth. And I'm Joy Sweeney here with Dr. Ed Moses. Thanks again.
Well, not doctor.
I just
do teach them sometimes and work with them.
Yeah, so anyway, sorry, with Ed Moses. I escalated you now, your stature. All right, thanks, Ed, again for being here. Appreciate it.